Welcome. Today's post is Beans, Alice and Teddy. Published on March 17, 2023. Bank collapse, Minecraft, Mr. Bean, and much more in today's post. Here are the topics we'll be decoding today. You can always find this list in the description below. If you enjoy this video, please press the like button and subscribe for weekly full-length blog posts and shorter, more shareable videos. Let's begin. Updates. The news everywhere is negative, but looks can be deceiving. There is a great contradiction between the way things look and reality, but it's this way because it has to be this way. The comms explain that much of what we see is a lie, and that includes this air of doom and gloom. To understand why, we need to understand what's been going on behind the scenes, especially in regard to banking. Do you remember back in 2020 when Q confirmed changes and cooperation of the Federal Reserve to fix things? Reconcile with the news this week. Two of the biggest banks going under. Despite surviving prior crashes, they met its match in Powell's hawkish Fed. This is the same person Trump appointed. This is one of many microcosms that can help you see what's really going on. Take a look at what's been going on with both of these massive banks. Both plunged 66.6% within around the same time. Silicon Valley Bank was responsible for serving 65% of all U.S. startups, and the government just took it over. Do you understand why Biden is president? The only way to clean the world up was to use everything possible. This is why we see arrests plus guilty plea at Silicon Valley Bank above. If that were all that was necessary, Trump could have stayed in office, but they needed to do much more to fix things. I go over this in many posts, read the intro if you haven't, but the short version is if Trump had stayed in office, he would have had to force the economy to stay afloat. Good? Yes, in theory, but what motive would all the businesses in the world have to clean things up if they are rolling in cash? None. They had to go after the bottom line of companies that make up the economy. This is why the most counterintuitive thing had to happen. They had to engineer a global situation that kills business for practically every company in every country in the world. Such a thing required the cooperation of every military, government, and many major companies in the world. October 18, 2019. Bill Gates Global Coronavirus Simulation. October 18, 2019. Wuhan Military World Games begins. Plus 30 days. November 17, 2019. Wuhan COVID first appears. Check my intro to learn more on this, but this allowed them to force companies that otherwise would have waited out Trump until a more favorable president came along into deals. Furthermore, the tracking of COVID allowed protection from the threat of going after the wallets. Then they needed to be in a situation where they could save any company that agrees to cooperate, i.e. Federal Reserve printing. This is what we've seen. Companies are hit hard by coronavirus, they come to the table and get bailed out. Some companies don't, and this is why coronavirus has long continued. Simply put, going after the countless companies involved in corruption meant hurting the economy to force compliance. This is why Biden was allowed in. He takes the economic heat that would have gotten Trump ejected by the voters. I have many posts covering all of these pieces in extreme detail. Also, because government took control, they now have unfettered access to every aspect of the company, including all financial logs. Multiply that by all the other companies we've seen fire CEOs, and it's safe to say a strong cooperation has been achieved. However, this can't last forever, and another reader tipped me off to this one. Tons of readers have been getting great at decoding lately. The Silicon Valley Bank takeover seems to have been the end. Why do I think that? Because the corona data collecting has just stopped. March 10, 2023, coronavirus counter discontinued. This is far from a certainty, but when we reconcile this news with the next few things I cover, there is a tremendous amount to get excited for. For example, the end of the red carpet was this week. New champagne, victory toast, color. Notice the first red carpet Hollywood opening was the opening night at the Egyptian Pyramid Theater. This was the same year Egypt got independence from the Crown. The first red carpet Oscars began the same day as the Bay of Pigs. The most famous screw-up I'm aware of involves the military. A screw-up that involved messing up time zones to kill bomber pilots, and reporters sabotaging it. Given CIA is tied to Hollywood/media and JFK started to really get upset at the CIA, I'd say this screw-up and his relationship with the CIA are tied together. JFK fired Dulles, MK Ultra Origin, over it, and Dulles, or their associate, likely in turn used a blackmailed killer to take out JFK. The history of the red carpet is given in that article as well. Top right, as the symbol originally was in inviting death. The new version invokes the sunset. This is a well-established symbol for the end of a day. So, what happened at the Oscars? Everything, 11, everywhere, 11 singularity, 11. Outside of the end of the red carpet, the most prominent event was the domination of a film, Everything Everywhere All at Once. A movie about a woman learning about the multiverse and the singularity. Before I get into the details, notice this pattern. It was released March 11th, won 11 nominations. Musk replied to the singularity, 11 letters, with a statement that Driving V11 would be released this weekend. The words, everything, everywhere, singularity all have 11 letters. I believe the timing on March 11th was meant to evoke Fukushima, which was also March 11th. A symbol in this context is about the end of keeping secrets. Check my Fukushima/Olympics post. There is a reason why Biden's countdown was tied to the Olympics, which itself began at Fukushima. September 26, 2020. Joe Biden, I got to the Senate 180 years ago. Plus 180 days equals March 25, 2021. March 25, 2021. Joe Biden, when I came to the U.S. Senate 120 years ago. March 25, 2021. Olympic torch begins its 121-day journey around Japan starting at the nuclear disaster site Fukushima. Plus 120 days equals July 23, 2021. Japan Olympic torch passing event ends. July 22, 2021. Joe Biden, way back 150 years ago when I was chairman of the Judiciary Committee. July 23, 2021. Tokyo Olympics start. Japan is 16 hours ahead of the USA, thus for Japan it was already July 23 when Biden said it. August 8, 2021. Tokyo Olympics end. Plus 180 days equals February 4, 2022. February 4, 2022, China Olympics start. Simply put, this appears to be the next transition point and the first I've seen that might involve waking up the masses around the world. All my prior decodes were only visible with comms awareness, but this one seems to be about giving a third eye. Notice the addition of the third eye. Googly eye. Google cooperation. Also, often trailer launches for these major films are important. Sometimes they are timed to things tied into the symbolism. Info is likely confusing at a glance, but I'll go through it step by step. 1945 Operation Paperclip equals giving Nazis jobs in U.S. government. Apollo program head was Nazi. 1946 Doomsday Antarctic Glacier first identified in Operation High Jump. 2001 Bush appoints Mueller as head of FBI. 2002 Musk leaves Russia and hires Mueller as business partner alongside CIA in QTEL. March 14, 2002, SpaceX founded. March 15, 2002, Doomsday Glacier chunk broken off of ice tongue. December 14, 2021, Doomsday Antarctic Glacier to collapse soon news. December 14, 2021, Everything Everywhere All at Once official trailer. Operation Paperclip connects to the Antarctic because that is the symbolism used to define the movements of a secret agent. You can't just say Bob the spy in Delaware met with 3 other spies and is doing X, Y, and Z. Instead they use coded locations and activities. You may remember the symbolism of jump as it ties to agents moving from country to country. I cover variants of it in many posts. The jobs they get are often high up in government, and this is why SpaceX's hiring of Mueller, at the same time as head of the FBI, Mueller, is meaningful. This is because SpaceX is the modern equivalent of Operation Paperclip, minus the Nazis. This might be why when SpaceX was founded it was represented with the Antarctic glacier breaking off. SpaceX handled hiring people post 9/11 that could be trusted with the kinds of secrets that 9/11 had. This is why the glacier is likened to a dam about to burst, and the bursting of that dam is tied to the trailer as the film has comms tied to disclosure. Much of this is my hypothesis rather than a highly confident decode, but I am sure of certain parts of it. For example, I'm confident of Musk's recent role in the Great Awakening. This is to say he's been working globally, China/German factories, to find the best way to get people educated without causing mass riots. It's mostly been prep work, kind of in the same way I've spent the last 5+ years studying symbolism so as to best teach it. I only became aware of the film hours before I post, and so I rushed through to figure out the comms. A future post will have full decode. This is a film with symbolism for fixing the MK families that gained success in relation to child sacrifice. This is why the film involves an emotionally abusive grandfather and mother that own a laundromat. This is why the grandfather forces his daughter to sacrifice her daughter. This is why the family has trouble with the IRS and potentially is going to go to jail. This is why the mother drives her daughter into an emotional wreck of a state her personality fractures, as this is how sacrificing with MK works. This is also why the answer to everything is kindness. This film is a marker for the ops trying to fix MK households. The IRS trouble is the kinds of pressure being put on sacrifice families to get them to agree to the change. The disclosure aspect is in teaching the family of MK what's going on. This is also why it's all framed as a multiverse, because the real-world version of this happening involves a wide spectrum of people all stuck in the same situation but with many variations. The puppet world father informs the mother in the main plot of the multiverse, and then she in turn informs her own husband of it. This is akin to a secret cult family letting the family in on the secret. This is a necessary step prior to mass disclosure, as the family needs to have time to digest it first. Perhaps most importantly, the primary message of the film is to be kind even when life doesn't make sense. This reminds me of an epiphany I had a long time ago. It's also critical when talking about disclosure. I talk about this so often, but I never want to create a mob. I want to figure things out and help others do the same. Lots of evil was done, sure, but until we know the full story we must be careful not to jump to conclusions and assume Party X is evil and Party Y is good. Haven't we been tricked enough to realize how big a danger that is? Looking again at Musk replies on how terrible things look, notice what he highlights. Atomic Heart, which indirectly connects to Gazprom, which you may be aware is tied to a recent sabotage costing potentially billions of dollars in damage. This is one of many examples of this secret war going on behind the scenes. A war which looks to finally be ending. Notice the new bra ads on Twitter targeting everyone. This is something Musk has been commenting on frequently. Notice the AI with the bra as well. What is the symbol in a bra? It's all about context. Musk links this idea to both murder and pornography multiple times. Covering up exposure. Notice that no spillage promise. The sequences tie the bra symbolism to ordering assassinations with cryptocurrency, far right side. So this may give us an indication on what is being bargained with for those involved. If you've read my posts on the MK system, you know it's incredibly prevalent everywhere. Some companies involved have been reluctant to take responsibility for past actions. Conversely, some have really stepped up to the plate and demonstrated the kinds of attributes we should all want to see in society. Of course, this is just one of many pushes going on in the world. Another involves tracking of criminals. Many famous YouTubers have been cooperating with the military by sending comms as markers for these events. I've covered many, from Mr. Beast and his bottomless wallet as he does video after video of helping others. It's an indication of which side is funded, not to mention motives. Note the relationship Mr. Beast has with Elon Musk in making him CEO. Even as a jest, it acts as a symbol. They are tied together. I covered some of his expensive comms, but this week I went into his smaller channel with Minecraft. A curious video where he plays hide and seek across the earth with famous YouTubers for a 10K fridge. Hunting people around the world. Notice the discussions they have about selling people out. The video is likely acting as an example to people thinking of running from legal battles. The people who know them will sell them out for deals for their own freedom. They will get caught and thrown in prison if they run. It goes over expected actions from runners like lying about locations, specifically lying about being dead. I go over a ton of death comms as it's a common way to duck charges for the ultra-wealthy. Also involves trying to hide underground but getting kicked out by the admin. Symbolism of a country involved kicking people out of safe areas. Several people lie and use camouflage, but it all fails. They all end up negotiating and all end up giving up friends for freedom. Most importantly, the world map keeps getting smaller and smaller. This ties into countries cooperating with the ops as the areas people can hide shrink. Notice how one of the pro gamers involved died not long after this contest. The contest is for a fridge, and he won a small one. Fridge is a symbol about keeping things secret. Remember that whole Indiana Jones surviving a nuke in a fridge. Same basic symbol. Note the gamer that died. His top video is killing other YouTubers in Minecraft. It's just one of many comms going on right now. The Steam Deck launch game ends with the main characters turning state's evidence and getting new identities. A lot of recent comms are tied to this, though the IRL version is fake deaths. Minecraft itself, like most top games, has been sending comms. October 3, 2020. Trump begins COVID therapy. October 3, 2020. Warden announced to track players. Not intended to be fought but avoided. June 7, 2022. Warden released. June 7, 2022. Everything everywhere all at once. COVID has been a war the world had with itself. It's about trying to clean things up while avoiding the many perils built into the world preventing it. This is why secrecy was necessary and so many counterintuitive plays. Know what happened the day after the Warden and Trump COVID therapy? October 4, 2020. Hurricane Delta begins. October 5, 2020. COVID Delta begins, most prominent COVID strain. It's incredible the scale of this conflict and tactics used by both sides. I don't always know which side is doing what and for what purpose, and this is why I need to keep studying. These update sections are a lot of people's favorite parts of my posts, but the important stuff is history and deconstruction. Understanding how we got here, as that's the only way we can figure out where to go next. So with that in mind, let's go through this week's decodes. Since I just covered Minecraft, let's decode that first. Mine plus Craft. By some metrics the most popular game of all time. Minecraft has consistently been the most viewed, or close to it, game on YouTube for more than a decade. This relationship it has with YouTube will be important to keep in mind. I've decoded pieces of this game before. For example, I went over how the longest reigning top YouTube account PewDiePie began his channel with Minecraft comms. Minecraft multiplayer, plus more people. I translated the comms as he coordinated people from Facebook in what appeared to be a migration. I didn't understand it fully, but I do now. Or at least I understand how Minecraft relates to YouTube a bit better. PewDiePie is technically a video game streamer, but really he doesn't release game videos so much as commentary. This means the most popular English gaming YouTube channel is Markiplier. Notice the connection between the two, as both began their channels with invoking multiplayer symbol. Many people. Markiplier became famous for his Five Nights at Freddy's videos. A horror series that took over numerous YouTube channels for a year or two. How does this relate to Minecraft, you ask? It's the whole point. Given the insane level of popularity Markiplier gained from Friday Nights at Freddy's, what kind of comms do you think surrounded it? The answer is surprisingly tied to Minecraft. August 12, 2014, Friday Nights at Freddy's 1 Markiplier video top 17 minutes. August 13, 2014, Friday Nights at Freddy's 1 Part 2. August 14, 2014, Minecraft Null Myth begins. August 15, 2014, Friday Nights at Freddy's 1 Part 3. There are a handful of famous horror stories tied to Minecraft and one hit during that original run of Markiplier Friday Nights at Freddy's videos that turned him into the top YouTube gamer. Context is everything, and this Minecraft horror story involves panicking over signs just like in Friday Nights at Freddy's, and he repeats having seen anything like this before, in a horror context. Notice the commentary on this documentary I highlighted, about the potential for YouTube views. While the Markiplier video has 100 million views, the famous horror story only has 67k, this is actually something the documentary talks about, as many of the videos that came after it about Null had much higher view counts. That's the point. Markiplier's videos, and others, were blowing up in view counts, and the comms community marked the event with this comm to discuss it. It functions as not just a marker but as a way to describe a path of action. To capitalize on the fad ASAP, and that's what they did. It's not about Markiplier getting 100 million views, that's a symptom of what's really going on here. This is about a community of comms-aware YouTube developers coordinating to steer public interest and profiting from it with exposure. Now, Null itself racks up hundreds of thousands of views, but if I were to post a collage of Friday Nights at Freddy's videos, single YouTubers like Markiplier have videos of 100 million views and have posted well over 100 Friday Nights at Freddy's videos, many with view counts in tens of millions, and MatPat has over 40 Friday Nights at Freddy's lore theory videos, many have 10+ million or more views. Also, there are hundreds of popular Friday Nights at Freddy's streamers, and many of them individually by themselves do more views than every Null video put together. So I hope you are grasping the distinction. Null horror was a tool used to coordinate the promotion of Friday Nights at Freddy's fandom. This use of the fad unlocks the point of Minecraft. Mine equals ownership. Craft equals creation. This is a symbol of creating something you own, creating a world, and it works in context of YouTube channels. The pursuit of diamond armor is the primary progression in Minecraft. Diamond equals stardom symbol. The pursuit of YouTube stardom. It's a way to communicate about control over one's work. It also exists in a symbiotic relationship with YouTube, as its promotion directly fuels the promotion of YouTube, and thus YouTube has in its best interest to promote Minecraft, which itself promotes YouTube. See how this works? See why it's long been the top game on YouTube? This doesn't mean Minecraft is only used to build channels. The root symbol is about ownership, which means it's perfectly suited to send drastically different comms about companies that buy up other companies. This horror story involves a kid playing Minecraft on his Microsoft Xbox 360 while talking in garbled audio on his Microsoft Skype and presenting with a terrible Microsoft PowerPoint presentation. See the pattern? Skype had just been bought by Microsoft. The story ends with everything on the computer being deleted and an appeal to shut down your Microsoft computer. The point, I believe, is in discussing Microsoft buying Minecraft. The name of the entity, 303, I believe, is a symbol of when Microsoft bought Bungie and turned the top Macintosh game studio into a Windows exclusive and turned the IP of Halo to 343 Industries. This is reinforced by the timing of the release. December 17, 2013, the new Herobrine incident, Entity 303. December 17, 2013, Minecraft PlayStation 3 Edition. So while the earlier symbol involved creating something you own, this is commentary on the risks of not keeping something you own. Also, Microsoft bought Minecraft a few years later. I get the feeling they tried to buy it earlier based on these comms and there was a community frustration over it or something. The story is focused on spying, and I suspect when a behemoth comes in to control a project, part of that is getting the data. That's just speculation for now though. Symbolism is akin to how flexible a word is in how it can be used endlessly based on the sentence around it. This doesn't mean you shouldn't learn the word, only that you shouldn't bind yourself to expectation that a symbol will be used the same way every iteration. I make that mistake at times, but I'm getting better, and I'd like to help readers from making the same mistakes I have worked hard at overcoming. Let's move on to another subject. The biggest ratings event of almost every year is the Super Bowl, which makes the event rife for important comms. Consider the 1996 Super Bowl halftime show. Context is everything when it comes to decoding and understanding the events around it is critical. 1996 halftime, Diana equals Diana. Diana Ross in 1996 exited the arena in a helicopter. We need to understand the world events around this time. Frequently this step of basic research is ignored when people try and do what I do, but you'll see over and over it is an essential research step. This was January 1996 and her performance begins with the song, Stop. In the Name of Love. What could having a famous Diana with her name in giant letters plastered on the field asking someone to stop mean? The answer comes from asking what else was in the media at this time. It just so happens there was an even more famous Diana in the headlines at this time speaking out against the royal family. Hence Stop. Princess Diana and the divorce. The very next month she announced her agreement to terms. She was vocal about being in danger with the royals plotting to kill her. The stop was a symbol for asking Diana to stop her prior path. With this context we can further clarify the meaning of the Super Bowl performance. The show climaxed with Diana singing I Will Survive as she flees in a helicopter. This was likely an effort to persuade her to fly, as in to go away before her acts caused certain parties to kill her. The symbol of fly can be used to convey many things, but in this case paired with I Will Survive is a clear symbol for as it suggests surviving. Know the actual origin of that song? November 27, 1978. Assassination of Harvey Milk, first gay public officer becomes gay icon. November 27, 1978. I Will Survive debut on Love Track's Gloria Gaynor. Reader decode equals Gloria Gaynor equals glorify gay. Symbol of agenda pushing, this appears to have been a propaganda campaign intended on creating a hero for the community to rally around and organize. The origin point for countless groups that push agendas. This doesn't necessarily mean his death was faked, but it seems it was planned out as a narrative to the day. Diana was likely being asked to fly before she was killed, and while it's possible there was an aspect of this with an intent on faking it. I encourage assuming things are real whenever possible, as it would be in poor taste to make light of a tragedy. Q asked, what did she find out? To understand we need context on a lot of people and times. I believe both Diana Ross and Princess Diana act as mouthpieces for comms for other entities. For example, consider the comms Diana sent during Chernobyl. May 4, 1986. Chernobyl containment. May 7, 1986. Princess Diana faints at Expo Pavilion. Notice the context of how she fainted, that it was while an explanation was being given of a computerized bicycle. This reinforces my decodes in the last two posts. I decoded that Chernobyl was partially about switching from government tech to private. This amounted to converting the blackmail ops and also control over the computer market. This is why the day before Chernobyl was contained, an amusement park named Dollywood opened. The symbol of Chernobyl was literally an amusement park like Dollywood. Also around this time. March 1977. Polanski trial, secret testimony from child about 5 people involved in child rape. March 1977. Uranus, 5 rings, discovered. May 4, 1986. Chernobyl containment. May 7, 1986. Princess Diana faints at Expo Pavilion. May 8, 1986. Roman Polanski Pirates of the Caribbean, Virgin Islands, $40 million budget. A man famous for running from the law for a 1977 rape involving the drugging of a 13-year-old. Note this case involved 5 people in grand jury testimony. This wasn't learned by the public until much later and is why at the same time 5 rings of Uranus were discovered. This was the symbol used to define control. Consider the Lord of the Rings ring to control other people. This may give a clue on what it is that Diana was in danger about, as having Polanski send comms about piracy, i.e. think about movie piracy as in looting footage. Diana fainting at learning about the computer is a sign of disapproval. The most famous Polanski's film I've covered extensively is shown above as well. Rosemary's Baby, it's about delivering the devil's baby. The 1977 Polanski arrest plus seizure plus fleeing the country appears to be when control changed hands of blackmail and MK footage. Notice Princess Diana, Diana equals moon goddess, met Charles in 1977, and given just how prominent their marriage was in media around the world, it seems likely their underage relationship was tied into these underage Polanski changes. Notice the big problem between Diana and Charles was of the prince having an affair with Rosemary. The same exact symbol tied to Roman Polanski's film about sedating women to let strangers rape them and child sacrifice to Satan. Both of those horror paths are shown in the film as methods for career advancement in Hollywood. Thus the symbol sent of his affair with a symbol for child sacrifice seems to be the disagreement between factions for which each was a mouthpiece for. They were working together with the marriage of Diana as the symbol of cooperation. The affair was in 1986. I guessed it would be 1986 even before I found the date, because it's just another symbol of the same thing. The different symbols are not identical, they are for the same event but with unique intent. Kind of like the difference between three people calling the president of Russia different things. One might call him a villain, one might call him a hero, and another might go further and use a slur to define him. All talking about the same person, but all use a different angle to define their perspective on that event. Regardless, Princess Diana seems to be anti-MK ops. Among her last acts was her famous landmine walk. I believe landmines are symbols used to define sleepers in various territories that can be activated. Her crusade against landmines is particularly interesting as she began right after divorcing from Charles, and parts of the UK government and royalty were vocally opposed to it. It's important to find the root of things and it comes to symbols. When it comes to symbols used for underage blackmail, there is no shortage of them, and among the earliest symbol for these acts is Alice in Wonderland. This book is strongly tied to the Queen of England for reasons I'll go over shortly. Alice in Wonderland. I've decoded parts of this symbol before, but in this post I'm going to break it open fully for the first time. Basic history: the author took pictures of children, dream photographs, and many of them were nude. Making and collecting nude child pictures today are a taboo that will land people in jail, but at the time it was literally just invented. This doesn't mean he's innocent, far from it. What it does mean is that if we had a giant timeline of the history of underage pornography. Cameras weren't sold mass market until 1888, Lewis Carroll was taking pictures of children a full 3 decades before this. Therefore the very first dot on a pornography timeline might actually be Lewis Carroll. That makes him a powerful symbol. Notice he developed several methods of code sending. This implies aspects of his work necessitated hiding them in code lest he get arrested. Note Q's use of Alice and Wonderland. This was the first stringer in the Q map, which is something Q placed at the bottom of posts for something to happen soon. It led to the Saudi Arabia arrests November 4, 2017. This doesn't mean the criminals arrested were unique in any way for their perversion. This symbol has been around for a long time. Note Walt Disney was founded the same day they began releasing their hybrid cartoons with real little girls. Alice Comedies, Alice in Wonderland with Virginia. Notice Alice was paired with Felix the Cat, which just so happens to be the same name as the first head of the KGB, who just so happened to begin within 1 month of this. October 14, 1923, Barney Google comic retitled. October 16, 1923, Walt Disney founded. October 16, 1923, Alice in Wonderland series begins, Walt Disney with Felix the Puss. November 15, 1923, Felix, first chairman of KGB, begins. KGB has a long history of blackmail. You can Google yourself, and so I don't think this is a coincidence. Back then they began at the same time with the same name invoked. Same symbol used in modern times. In fact, the most famous version of Alice in Wonderland is by Disney and begins with a conversation about teaching Alice about conquest, blackmail usage, and then she talks about how her special world would be nothing but picture books. Collected blackmail. Then she talks about making everything nonsense, as this is how it's all obfuscated. Just like Lewis Carroll's coded ciphers. Then she goes to sleep and the adventure begins. Why does her going to sleep begin the adventure? A better question is, why would someone take the risk and rape a child? Or perhaps better stated, how could you convince someone to do this and believe they could get away with it? There's an easy solution, and it's all baked into this story. During the time of Alice in Wonderland, they had just invented a way for the first time to put them unconscious and do bad things. Notice the very first fatality was a 15-year-old girl. As in, children had been sold for rape and the child was scammed into this arrangement under guise of medical procedures. This documented case of a 15-year-old's death was the first accident with the technique. This is why there are assurances in Alice in Wonderland of safety. There is a whole conversation about how the bottle is not marked poison. So it's safe, and instead she becomes a telescope. Symbol of looking. Also a symbol of a giraffe by making it her neck. The animal symbol is tied to eating from the tallest trees. As in rewarded by rich people. The most famous iconography from Alice in Wonderland is the smiling vanishing Cheshire cat. Cats are used to symbolize many things, but why is this one always vanishing and smiling? Called the puss in the original story. Think about that carefully in context of the time period. Puss would have at the time been a word that even more than today would be associated with vagina. The symbol of a smiling puss is that it's to be a pleasant experience for the child. This is marketed to parents that might want to enter high society and might be willing to trade their daughters for it. Now we get into the most important part of this symbol. It's no good just to have blackmail, you have to have a threat of using it. This is why the whole story climaxes with the underage Alice in a courtroom testifying. Alice testifying about the invisible Cheshire cat. Remember, the girl is asleep this whole time. The symbol is twofold, one being asleep in figurative sense of them not being activated to testify, but also literally, as this was how people were coerced into abusing children as they believed it would be evidence-less. The recent invention of a way to keep people knocked out. This was the trap to get them to act on the child, but this is why people were watching, telescope, and thus the threat of scandal becomes the strings tied to the person. This is why crying is a key part of the story, as the child would then be made aware of what happened and activated as necessary to pull the trap closed. Not just crying, but crying a flood so strong it allows her to enter a locked door. Most variations also carry this crying part. Asking to sing Cherry Ripe in front of strangers. The evidence of a broken hymen. The evidence. With witnesses, this is how people were tricked into a situation where they abuse a girl thinking it is a perfect crime to get away with, and this story using symbols tells them it was anything but. The pictures were used not necessarily as evidence, as back then it required too long to an exposure, but instead as ways to entice predators into acts with a knocked out child. Notice the rat lighting a fire on the head in this version as she cries. This all means that when Alice in Wonderland is reproduced in film, it's likely tied to new blackmail ops beginning. However, critically, it also means the symbolism will be tied to the control of law enforcement. September 12, 1910. Alice Wells, first female police officer. September 9, 1910. Alice in Wonderland movie second film adaptation. September 30, 1931. Alice in Wonderland first adaptation with audio. October 4, 1931. Dick Tracy famous detective premieres in Sunday Comics. The second ever Alice adaptation happened at the same time the first female police officer began. Named Alice. What are the odds? The first one with talking began right as the most famous comic detective ever, Dick Tracy, began. What about the first Alice adaptation? It's also covered above. October 17, 1903. First ever Alice in Wonderland film adaptation. October 17, 1903, Seattle Judo demonstration. This will only mean something to you if you remember my Seattle Judo decode weeks ago. It's tied to Teddy Roosevelt blackmail, and we will get more into that later in the post. There's also December 14, 1962, Mariner probe first ever to visit Venus, sex symbol. December 15, 1962, Alice in Wonderland Australia musical special. Seattle Mariner comms are also tied to it, and so these adaptations are tied to the blackmail ops. This extends all the way to current day. With Johnny Depp and the Pirates of the Caribbean, Virgin Islands, starring as the Mad Hatter, hosting a secret White House party. What is the symbolism of the Mad Hatter? This is the first witness to the crime involving Alice. Notice his hats are not his own. Just like in Batman, this is a symbol for attaching a string to someone. Hat equals job. So they get their hat by way of attaching a string. Story ends with the sister imagining what adventure Alice had. With cooperation instead of a courtroom, it's all a dream. This is how they increased control over government and stardom at the time. A powerful lure and threat using children that has lasted from then until present day. The fact Disney began with Alice and had its most famous iteration is worth pausing on. Back in the early days of Disney, there was a parody of Disney that's quite revealing. If you watch that short, it involves Mickey Mouse trapping the star of a rival company, Bimbo. Mickey Mouse locks a man into a cult clubhouse that constantly asks him to be a member. He refuses over and over again while being threatened in different ways until eventually he's seduced into it. Doesn't get much clearer than that for how takeovers work. So while we understand the utility, who was behind the string pulling? Clearly this is a lot more than Lewis Carroll. So what symbol was used at the start? July 4, 1862, Alice in Wonderland Duckworth boat with the child Alice Liddell Pleasance. July 1, 1865, SS Princess Alice Pleasure Cruise enters service. November 1865, Alice in Wonderland debut. Pleasure cruise named Alice begins at the same time Alice in Wonderland. Even timed to the original boat ride. Original story for Alice was of him taking the young girls he photographed nude on a boat ride. Notice this ship was named after Princess Alice, daughter of the Queen. September 3, 1878, sinking of SS Princess Alice. December 14, 1878, Princess Alice death. Not a real death but a death, the symbol of what? The answer is likely a stop demand on the blackmail ops. Some power may have been unhappy with the attempt at putting strings on people and took it out on the ship. The response was then having Alice die. That's why these two events happen in this sequence. Speaking of which, having a tie to the medical industry certainly would help with not just chemicals for sedation but deaths. Lewis Carroll was famous for creating coding ciphers to hide, what exactly? November 1864, Alice's Adventures Underground. November 25, 1864, Voyage to the Center of the Earth. The title of Carroll's book was changed from Underground, by Tom Taylor, the author of Our American Cousin, the play Lincoln was watching when he was assassinated in 1865. Carroll originally wanted to call his book Alice's Adventures Underground. This connection with the murder of Lincoln fits because blackmailed people can be pressured into murder. Famously, he believed that the newspapers would support his murder as they had long been anti-Lincoln. And I suspect that coverage was part of the campaign to condition would-be attackers. Find someone that had a particular axe to grind with Lincoln and then give him the pressure to do what he already was thinking about, i.e. blackmail exposure, which was already used to control stars. A major part of Alice in Wonderland is croquet. 1868-06-23 QWERTY keyboard begins Latham Scholes patents the Scholes and Glidden typewriter. Plus 1 month exactly. July 23, 1868, famous croquet club opened at the height of the craze. Famous inventions are tied to larger pushes done through government. Notice the similarity of a typing hammer and a croquet hammer/mallet. When I looked up famous croquet dates, literally the only date I found was this one, and it just so happens to be exactly 1 month away from the first ever patent for a typewriter. A decision had likely been made to revolutionize the industry, and so the six-man croquet club sent comms at the time giving updates about progress on getting industries to join. This highlights a newspaper control, as that would also be a part of the scandal. Even before court, which is also symbolized with a hammer, they would have newspapers print the scandal as pressure to force compliance or even trigger the courts. Notice how all the witnesses drink tea. Tea is a symbol of getting information from the church. Holy Cross equals lowercase t, and in context it's asserting the witnesses will be coordinated with testimony against the abuser. Remember that during the time of Alice in Wonderland, Lewis Carroll worked for the church with a long family history with them. Alice is likened to a snake. Snake symbolism is many people working as one and another symbol used to denote the Catholic Church networks. Why does Alice in Wonderland involve rabbit symbolism? Notice Alice grows giant and reaches for the rabbit. The first time she reached for the rabbit while large in the Disney film, she was blocked by a locked door that only her tears plus rat could get her through. Rabbit symbolizes what? Rabbit symbolism is of high sex drive. Rabbits are more famous than any other animal for having sex. A byword for sex, symbolism for uncontrollable lust. Same reason why Playboy is represented by a rabbit and run by the CIA for blackmail. Notice Playboy penguin began just before Playboy with rabbit. Penguin is a symbol tied to wearing suits, spy symbol, and living around frozen water. Water equals info. Ice is unmoving, symbol of storage. Now let's combine everything we've learned to understand a slightly more complex calm. Consider the original inspiration for Alice in Wonderland. One of the girls he took pictures of nude. Alice Liddell. Alice Liddell / Chuck Liddell, Iceman. The name Liddell would be attached to what? There is a famous MMA fighter with this name, the guy who is credited with bringing MMA into the mainstream. Chuck Liddell, the Iceman. Notice his string of victories he had. This was the height of his fame, the time when MMA went mainstream. Notice how after making MMA popular his career abruptly died May 26, 2007 with the first of many humiliating losses. Given the symbolism of Liddell, what do you think might be timed to this? Before I answer that question, let's look at his film roles prior to the losing streak. How high? Do you remember my decode of this one? The very next thing that happens is his friend comes over and shares that he got a new girlfriend online, and he had pictures of her, only it's just pictures of her and it's the same as all his other girlfriends. It was symbolism for the internet pornography push. Specifically, it was symbolism for pacifying dangerous people by addicting them to pornography. Now, do you have a good guess as to what Chuck Liddell's loss might be timed to? May 25, 2007. Pornhub launches second biggest adult website ever made. May 26, 2007. Chuck Liddell loses championship, loses every fight except one for rest of career. May 26, 2007. Nessie caught on tape. Day after the soon-to-be top pornography site launches the violent white man. So Chuck Liddell was hoisted to champion specifically to tear him down as a message for pornography. Also timed to a Loch Ness Monster comm. The Loch Ness comm is one I already decoded tying to blackmail, and here we just have another variant of it. Notice the original Loch Ness picture was by a gynecologist. The new one is of best footage he had ever seen. The comms community was sending messaging about the new pornography website set to explode across the net. Literally in the top 10 for website traffic in some years. Think about how big that is. Anyway, these are comms tied to blackmail but adapted for the masses. They are different than the Alice in Wonderland comms, as they aren't tied to actually blackmailing people but instead conditioning them into preferred behaviors. Even so, they have the same roots of using pictures of naked girls to lure in adult men into addictions. This brings us to the next big subject. Big Ben. Notice another focus with Alice in Wonderland involves watches and keeping time. It's not just the White Rabbit with the pocket watch but the Mad Hatter and others that are focused on time. Know what was new in UK around this time? Most famous clock in the world. 1862 Big Ben begins keeping time. 1862 Alice in Wonderland boat ride. Now technically if you look this up, Big Ben was built in 1859, but it only worked for a few days before breaking, so really Big Ben didn't start working until 1862, the exact same time the clock-focused Alice in Wonderland began. What is the meaning of this connection? I decoded Ben in past posts as a symbol tied to recordings, and it hit me this week: the root symbol. Origin of Big Ben ties into destroyed records and the need to keep accurate to the second. The symbol, when reconciled with Alice in Wonderland nude photography plus kids, becomes clear. Symbolism of Big Ben is tied to keeping blackmail. This explains why Peter Pan is tied to Big Ben. Notice the sequence: kids get drugged by the street Bernard and the rich family decides whether to call the police about Peter Pan's shadow. Peter Pan visits the sleeping children, and they travel by Big Ben to Neverland. I don't think I need to translate that much here, but I will pause on the drugging by the street Bernard. Older version of Peter Pan is even more transparent. Reconcile this focus of Peter Pan returning for his shadow with the symbolism of developing pictures in a dark room. This brings us to the root symbol of Ben. Big Ben equals Ben as in where you have been, a symbol of keeping records of actions for the first time through photography. We can see a pattern of record keeping in Big Ben's history, as I covered before, but also in films with it. The two most famous films with Big Ben based on a Google search are Peter Pan and a 1935 Hitchcock film focused on Mr. Memory. A man with perfect memory. This could just be coincidence, but it's one of those things where I'm trying to solve a symbol and the pattern points me in a clear direction. I'm going to return to Big Ben later, but let's get into a subject that will connect with Big Ben in a powerful way. Bean. So this entire post began due to a request to decode Sean Bean. This ended up being a fascinating dig, and I want you to understand why before I decode it. Sean Bean is a man famous in a very unique way. Most notably for being killed in 24 different major films and shows, as well as meeting bad ends in others. Now, if that wasn't enough, two of these deaths are often ranked in lists for greatest film/show deaths you are likely to find anywhere online. He starred in the first Lord of the Rings, which by any count is among the most popular film series of all time, and he was also the main character for the first season of Game of Thrones, which itself was also arguably the most popular show of its decade. He was one of only 2 actors the author demanded for the role. He was the only member of the Fellowship of the Rings to die, and his death is when the Fellowship to split up. His capture and then death in GOT is even more important, as it acts as the catalyst for all the kingdoms of the world to split and wage the world war that makes up the primary plot of the next several books/seasons. That's a curious coincidence in casting, isn't it? Why was it so critical that the author required Ned Bean be cast as a man that dies? What is the symbolism of Ned Bean that makes him tied to bad endings? The easiest way to decode stars I've found are by checking their birthdate and name. Not all actors have comms using these methods, but some do. Sometimes I even get lucky, and it's both name and birthdate, making it extremely easy to decode. Sean Bean happens to be in this category. April 17, 1959, Sean Mark Bean born. April 17, 1959. Air crash kills 26 including baby born on flight. That helps clarify his connection with death. Plane crashes are a common way for stars to be killed, and this particular crash is tied to a baby being born on a doomed plane and also dying on the 17th. Q. The birth of a child is often used to symbolize new ops. I cover this in many posts, and so by being born the same day as a famous tragedy with a baby being born on a plane that then crashes to kill it? That's a powerful symbol. Doubly powerful symbolism because it takes place on the 17th day, Q equals secret, of the 4th month, 4 equals death in Japan. That last point only matters when discussing Japan, but the rest is solid. I already had a theory on bean as a symbol, and digging into Sean Bean confirmed it. It ties into the baby. A bean is literally a seed. A symbol of the start of a plant. So his symbol by this logic is an attempt to create a plant that failed. Or more specifically, his symbolism is of a doomed plant. A plant doomed to be born and then die right after. This is why his death is in the first Lord of the Rings and the first season of GOT. Of course, this is only if I'm reading Bean correctly. We need to dig deeper, and thankfully there's a famous symbol that is literally defined as Bean we can dig into. A movie with Mr. Bean. A man who gets picked to join Langley, i.e. CIA symbolism. That fits seed symbolism perfectly. The movie involves a man tied to the US military buying the most famous US painting of all time. Symbolism of the military funding CIA. The painting itself that Mr. Bean is bringing is called Whistler's Mother, a painting called several times the most famous American painting. I'll decode this later, but for now let's focus on Bean. Note Bean's introduction being just about to be fired. However, he's the favored son of someone important. That too fits with seed symbolism. So instead of firing, they ship him to the US to deliver the $50 million painting, Whistler's Mother. Note the very first episode of his show begins with a test. Mr. Bean begins by obnoxiously winking as a way to get the attention of the other test taker. This, I believe, is a parody of a new person added to the team. A comms-aware person that fails at sending the necessary comms. A new seed, as it were, but a bad one. Whenever someone is new at any tough job, they struggle picking it up at first. The jokes here play on the unique requirements for ops to send comms in a subtle but clear way. By going over the top again and again, he represents the failure of this. In another skit in the first episode, he gets guidance at church and then is the most annoying person possible. Based on my decodes, church networks are one of the primary ways many comms-aware people network, so this again fits the same template as the test. I believe it's meant to represent the disaster of getting someone incompetent in a new comms position. Another skit has him trying to hide changing into his underwear. But it turns out the person is blind. Symbolism for a comms-aware person trying desperately to hide their activities, but realizing at the end the person is not comms-aware, blind, and so they just wasted their time and panicked over nothing. Another skit has Mr. Bean with a jazz player. Jazz is a symbol tied to the Z symbolism for sleep, and it's used to define an operation meant to have people ignore whatever is going on. This is why Mr. Bean ruins this by dancing alongside him. Again, symbolism of a bad plant. Yet another skit has Mr. Bean approaching a man that suddenly has a heart attack. Mr. Bean then uses a magazine to breathe into his mouth and then the telephone pole to bring him back to life. This is symbolism for fake deaths and how the people involved are supposed to be left alone. By using the telephone pole, the symbolism is in him calling the deceased despite taboo. By walking on him, it's symbolism of him approaching the deceased. By using the magazine to breathe into his mouth, it's a symbol for a publication talking or showing things that are taboo due to death. Something like printing paparazzi photos of the deceased due to being unaware of the death, which I'm sure is a thing that has caused alarm bells for more than one spy agency. Another skit involves him being a bad plant, for example butting in line in the most unethical way possible. Comms-aware people do butt in line as they get favored positions in companies using comms, but this takes that truth and ratchets it up to comedic levels. He sabotages the elderly, severely injured and children to get ahead in line. This is pushing this idea to its most extreme for comedy. So with all this in mind, we can make a few conclusions on Sean Bean and as a symbol. The comm isn't the same as Mr. Bean, as his symbol is tied to death. His is a premature ending to a new plant. Mr. Bean on the other hand is symbolic of getting a new plant that is just the worst possible person. A worst case scenario for getting a new partner. This Bean symbol may be why the earliest and largest Q supporter was Tracy Beans. Symbol intended for finding/working new seeds. Speaking of which, my personal history can shine some light on Bean as a symbol. I grew up in the cult world but was not taught comms. In two different situations in my life I was involved with families that had a dog named Beans. Both of these situations involved locations where new plants would be taught. The first of which was a place that was MKing the kids including me. It was a hub of drug use and creating terrorists. Multiple times they inadvertently demonstrated to me, they had access to surveillance of the inside of my room and around the house. I know this for a fact because there were several circumstances that were created with impossibly precise timing tied to things I would do in private, and they would know and act on. I can't explain these situations without giving walls of text on why I was doing what I was doing, but the point is it was impossible for them to do what they did without inside information that could only be gained through monitoring. Without giving exact details, some of these circumstances involved embarrassing things I had done and left traces of in ways that I didn't imagine anyone would ever find out about. In all of these circumstances they knew exactly what I had done, but pretended not to know, and used the information to create a situation to embarrass me with discovery of this thing. These were all to create trauma over and over to condition me into a specific kind of mindset. At the time I viewed each instance as my own bad luck, but once I learned of the comms world it clicked. They used this intel to hurt me and probably many other people in the most extreme way they could manage. All of it with the goal of creating school shooters. If I talk extensively about what they did I know you would agree with this last point, but I don't want to make this post all about me. The psychological part is a discussion for another day, but their ownership of a dog named Beans clearly indicated this was a house made to cultivate new plants that weren't always 5:5 comms aware. An indication to other plants that they would get things wrong at times. One of the teenage clowns in my age group at the time peers lived in this home was named Ben, and he was the one that demonstrated more than any other he had access to a feed in the house. His father was a network engineer for a company I won't name. So this gives us a bit more clarity on the utility of Ben. The other use of Beans was pretty much the same situation, and not worth elaborating on at the moment. Instead let's continue with Mr. Bean. Someone in a high position is often tied to blackmail, so they have jokes about that too. If the blackmailer were the worst. Begins with Mr. Bean taking pictures of trash and a naked boy statue. Symbolism of blackmail, and then after Mr. Bean gets annoyed at the guard he begins harassing him. Giving him a Hitler mustache and tying a teddy bear to him and giving him a Hitler mustache. Remember this is all about blackmail. His harassment gets so bad that the soldier breaks code and leaves. This is a symbol of someone getting so upset at the blackmailer that they cease to be controlled and just take the consequences. Given the consequences here would be a life-ending scandal, it's that much more comedic in a comms context. Mr. Bean was able to annoy him with comms to the point he decided to leave regardless. The threats via comms would be a thing they do as a way to keep people in line, letting them know they have the goods, but while this is what Mr. Bean does, he does it in such an over-the-top way that it ceases to be effective and ruins everything for both parties. Knocking the teddy bear asleep. So this is a good point to go more in depth about teddy bear symbolism. It's sedation comms, as these tie into the Alice in Wonderland symbolism, only for boys. It ties historically back to Teddy Roosevelt. Notice South Park used his iconography to represent the world-traveling pedophile club founder. November 14, 1902, Teddy Bear invented Teddy Roosevelt. October 27, 1902, Tessie/Teddy anthem debut in play about descent of Venus Sextet, becomes Boston Red Sox World Series theme. October 17, 1903, first ever Alice in Wonderland film adaptation. October 17, 1903, Seattle Judo demonstration. April 22, 1904, Robert Oppenheimer born, father of the atomic bomb. April 23, 1904, Teddy Roosevelt officially ends Japanese judo training under Saburo. Around the World in 80 Days symbolism, which connects back to Alice in Wonderland as it was named by that author. Seattle was during this time period the gateway to the East, as the primary port for Japan/China. It's also where people tied to blackmail would traffic. Judo equals flipping people. That's not the only way Teddy connects to Alice in Wonderland, but we'll get to that later. Anyway, we can still get more from Mr. Bean. Pink Panther. In that first scene in the first episode of Mr. Bean, he uses a pink panther with a penis tail. He uses this symbol alongside a Mickey Mouse alarm clock to send a message. To understand this message, we have to decode Pink Panther. Pink is often a symbol used for weakness, but it's best to dig into the original source to determine symbolism. The original movie about an incompetent detective that gets sent to jail at end, but it's fine because he becomes a national hero. Pink Panther equals looks dangerous but isn't. So the symbolism with Mr. Bean with a Pink Panther plus alarm clock was of not being afraid of the ticking clock. That's a quick Pink Panther decode. Now let's go through the film. CIA, Langley, getting the top man from England, which would be akin to getting an MI6 agent. All to unveil a $50 million picture instead of John Bon Jovi. Symbolism with buying expensive paintings is in ops funded. The ops are symbolized by the painting and defined in press releases typically. This is something I decode frequently. With tens or sometimes hundreds of millions in cash exchanged to hire a set of plants for a purpose. There are many types of ops, and they require someone to set the stage with comms to coordinate them. This is why they discuss having John Bon Jovi, as that would be a typical way for the CIA to coordinate an op with a major musician. Of course, this is Mr. Bean, and so the joke is in getting the most incompetent person possible for this job. The buyer is from the US military, and that's where the CIA budget comes in. The one that funds and the CIA delivers. Very next scenes involve a sick boy on a plane. Mr. Bean takes the boy's vomit and punctures it like a balloon all over a man. Vomit symbolism is of someone forced to talk about something they don't want to. In this context, it's him. Instead of using blackmail for compliance, it's him forcing a victim to talk despite his job as an agent to keep this very thing from happening. Getting the plant filthy in public. This movie scene is a remake of one of the first episodes of Mr. Bean, but it's even more transparent there. Turning up the volume with the sick boy next to him. Showing him his Teddy in such a way that makes talk. Notice he bends him over. Miming vomit to get him to vomit, and the most clear symbol. Whistleblowing. Which leads to the same conclusion where he blows up the bag of child vomit. The crucial symbol that gave it away is the whistleblowing. He teaches him how to blow a whistle after looking at a Teddy bent over. Remember that the painting, Whistler's Mother, is at the heart of the film as well. Whistler's Mother. Called in the film, and plenty of other places, as the most famous American painting of all time. The time frame of the painting is the same era as the Alice in Wonderland comms. These are comms of the whistleblowing involving children, but we'll get to that a bit later. Notice all the focus on who is going to take responsibility for Mr. Bean. Symbol of a new plant and who is to blame when one screws up. The fundamental conflict in the film is with the wife of Langley that Mr. Bean is staying with. He gets her so upset she leaves her husband. Notice CIA Langley gets in the shower equals symbol of getting clean. Mr. Bean ruins it by being in the shower together and picks up the phone for his wife. Getting caught instead of getting clean. He realizes that Mr. Bean is the worst, and then we get into the painting itself. Mr. Bean erases the mother's head and draws in a cartoon caricature on the red carpet. $50 million painting ruined, and the danger of going to jail becomes critical. Okay, let's get into the actual painting as it's extremely educational as to what's really going on here. Whistler's Mother. Notice the name of the original guy behind the painting is George Washington Whistler. Symbol of America itself. Whistler worked for United States military after leaving Russia. Notice during that era, Whistler was most commonly used in baseball. The very first Major League Baseball game in America was the same year Whistler made his famous picture of his mother. Notice the story attached to it. Likening it to an NBA draft pick. Reconcile with this being the first ever piece of American art bought by the French government. His mother acted as a replacement for another model. Which model? His most common model was a woman named Jo, his mistress. He sketched out quite a few underage nude girls that I'm not going to show, but his young mistress is particularly interesting as she modeled in sexual poses with other girls for other artists. Along with his underage children paintings, his father was the guy that built the Russian railroads. He spoke Russian and French. Notice his half-sister's husband training as a surgeon, the kind of job that would allow access to chemicals to knock someone out. So these are the extension of Liddell comms, the blackmail ops attaching strings. His first famous painting being a young girl and the piano. Notice the famous song with Whistler's mother mentioned. Comparing it to Mickey Mouse and a Waldorf salad. Waldorf Hotel was famous for blackmail, as I've shown in other posts. March 13, 1893, Waldorf Astoria Hotel built, largest most tech-savvy hotel in the world. April 8, 1893, Vanderbilt Geneva Beaver Falls first college basketball game. The Whistler's mother painting is by far his most famous, and that symbol of whistleblowing is an important op tied to today. Notice Donald Duck posing for it. Other uses in pop culture. How about The Simpsons, which tie it back to teddy bears? Symbol of Mr. Burns' blackmail. As in people that become tied to that world get trafficked. Burns is set up as beginning that way by a rich man wanting him. It's a Citizen Kane parody, but what is that a symbol of? What was Rosebud? According to some sources it was sex. Anyway, so we see the journey of the teddy bear. Shown as Lindbergh's lucky toy and the downfall of Hitler, and then on a submarine. To understand the Lindbergh connection, let's look at the first Mickey Mouse. Predating Steamboat Willie. Involves Mickey being a date rapist acting as he pretends to be Lindbergh. Alongside the inherent rat symbolism of Mickey Mouse, this is likely sending a message about the various surveillance gigs going on. So many of these markers are tied to spycraft, as I'm sure you can see. And of course that includes sports. Sports use comms tied to coordination of large teams of spies, and notice how Whistler's mother was painted in 1871. 1871 equals the Major League Baseball game. So this is the same year as Whistler, a word tied strongly to baseball at the time. So these are the coordinated ops from America set up overseas. American spies sent to Paris coordinated through the news using Whistler's mother. This is why there are always sections in newspapers dedicated to art in newspapers and other things that have low mass public interest. There's always a reason. Anyway, so after Mr. Bean ruins Whistler's mother, CIA Langley and Bean go to a bar. He uses a peanut to turn the baseball game off and replace it with sheep. A symbol of following. This is the transition point where Mr. Bean stops being incompetent and fixes everything. Remember how Mr. Bean is connected to blackmail in the original series. Young son that can't stop thinking about naked women asking Mr. Bean to come to his room and look at sexy posters of Cindy Crawford. This gives Mr. Bean an idea on how to fix everything. So he breaks into the museum riding the skateboard of the boy that just tried to get him to go to bed with him. The symbol with the poster of Cindy is likely in using children. Much like the comms I've gone over involving Cindy Brady and Alice, cleanup, the maid. Brady evidence. Giving the guard something to make him need the restroom. He then replaces the $50 million painting with a poster which he covers in eggshells. This does the trick and the show is back on, with the military suitor arriving to see. A suitor played by Burt Reynolds. A symbol I covered extensively in my Science of Stars post. May 19, 1977, Smokey and the Bandit No. 2 Movie of Year. May 25, 1977, Star Wars No. 1 Movie of Year. Both films involve a group of rebels smuggling a girl dressed all in white, carry long distances away from the government and away from the small moon. Smokey and the Bandit has that same plot threads as Star Wars in the major symbols, and it was released the same week. These were comms tied to the transition of data ops I frequently go over. The whole concept of the painting appears to symbolize foreign cells of America involved in ops, so it returns thanks to Burt Reynolds. So for Burt Reynolds of all people to be the buyer is a joke. His symbol was of moving ops overseas, and so he brings back the most incompetent possible. So he returns the American painting and states he can't tell the difference between a painting and a car crash. The joke being that Mr. Bean is a car crash rather than quality, and so Mr. Bean failing goes over the heads of the buyer, and this is why it works out. Mr. Bean gives a speech, calling the mother an ugly old bat. These presentations are supposed to be full of comms to coordinate agents, but because the buyer is incompetent it ends up being fine. Then to finish up the movie we learn that the daughter of Langley is in the hospital for a motorcycle accident. This is due to her hanging around with a bad influence, and that gets to the root of what CIA ops are supposed to do in protecting against dangerous insurgents. This is done by incorporating various people tied to the police and other industries to identify threats and coordinate with other plants to remove them. This is why in the next scene Mr. Bean goes to the hospital and dons a surgeon's uniform. He then drops an M&M into a police officer's gunshot wound, cleans it and then eats it. Symbol of taking in a shell of a police officer to CIA ops. So he succeeds in getting the kinds of agents needed for ops using disgusting symbolism. Just like the comms he sent in the first episode, it's not that he doesn't understand comms, he's just really bad at them. Often being so bad he ruins the op, but in this case it works out. His stories go from constant failing into successes. He actually puts a bullet into the wound and finds the bullet he reinserted. Which is a scam. Finds the daughter in a deep sleep and then forces her awake by shocking himself. Again, he fails so hard that it works. For his reward he asks to stay longer and gives them gifts. 6 eggs, laxatives, and a Barbie doll. Symbols of beginnings of spycraft for the daughter. This is why my first thought on how he shocked her awake was in getting her to recognize the importance of having good spies. Her waking up symbolizing turning over a new leaf. Anyway, notice how he flips them off, as that's kind of symbolic of his entire character. He continues getting things wrong, but through some twist of fate he is able to continue his job as spy. Ends with Teddy Bear and Whistler's mother. Remember that Whistler's mother symbolized the foreign ops, and so him changing the stern-looking whistleblowing mother, and he replaced it with a cartoon goofy face, is symbolic of what he represents in relation to actual ops. It's not that it's not a painting, it is still an op, it's just a comedically incompetent one. This brings us to the last bit of Mr. Bean media I'll go through. The cartoon, which focuses again on the teddy bear. Selling them as bunny bears, symbol of a rabbit, is in the sex drive. Perverse symbolism, a way to define with comms a sex trafficking operation that Mr. Bean haplessly dismantles. He watches a nature show and sets up a camera to take pictures of Teddy at a hotel. Locks it up, symbol of the blackmail ops being set up. He does protect the teddy bear, so in that sense it's not negative, and as it shows him breaking up symbolic sex trafficking it's presented as a positive, but unless I'm missing something it looks like it's presenting him setting up a blackmail operation. This ties into most other Teddy comms, for example if we return to that Simpsons Bobo episode. So the goal of Homer when he gets Burns' teddy bear is to set up a recording studio. Symbol of setting up blackmail ops. Speaking of which. Bulls. I'm sure I'll decode Michael Jordan at length in a future post, but for this one I found an interesting connection. 1988 Bull, Red Wolf born. 1988 Bulls, Jordan wife pregnant leads to marriage. December 29, 2006. Bulls, Michael Jordan divorce 17 years. December 29, 2006. Red Wolf bucking bull died born 1988. I don't know what this means, but it's curious that this famous Bronco bull died the exact same day the most famous bull got divorced. When I noticed this I looked up when it was born and it just so happened to be born right when the marriage decision happened. Heck, might have even been the same day, but they don't keep records that precise. Either way seems likely this bull was used to represent the same thing their marriage did. When I looked up this famous bull turns out it was tied to a rider murdered. Pay attention to the patterns here. So looking up this bull tied to the most famous bull with Jersey 23 and 17-year marriage. First thing that comes up is rider on teddy bear killed riding red wolf bull at age 23 with 17,000 people. Now connecting this with teddy bear gives us a bit of a clue on what would cause someone to die, as it seems this is tied to more blackmail threats. It's owned by Red Bluff, so I suspect this was the wink that the death wasn't real. I.e. invoking bluff as a way to say you can't use my blackmail as we can just pull this card and die. I need to dig much deeper into famous bulls before I can be confident of that. Another quick decode. Godfather puppet strings. I've decoded small parts of Godfather before, but never the root. So when I looked into the origin of Godfather I noticed it shared a date with a very curious and famous movie. March 10, 1969. Godfather first published. March 10, 1969. I Am Curious banned erotic movie about blackmail storage top box office draw for 2 weeks due to Johnny Carson and other celebs seeing. A film about a woman with blackmail on men. Time to Godfather strings. A woman who gets a man fired and warns him he may have an STD, comms tied to blackmailing danger. I could probably decode that further, but that's best for another post. Let's go into a famous game I had requested. Fallout section. The definition of fallout. The damaging environment created due to using nukes. Nukes, as I've decoded, are symbolism for booms, which can be things like blackmail used to take out the leader of a country. The symbol of the mass destruction of the country is tied to the scope of the target. I found a handful of clues that solved this one, the first of which was noticing a pattern in regard to the voice talent in Fallout 4. The pattern with this voice actress is that all of the characters are criminals on the run from the law, i.e. court. Which puts her name as Courtney into focus. The characters span not just escaped convicts but a spy that works at a virus lab. So this tells me that the symbol for Fallout is people acting after they fake their deaths. This was confirmed by looking at Fallout 2's release window. October 29, 1998. Fallout 2, post-nuke. October 30, 1998. Grim Fandango, post-death travel agent helps newly deceased start new lives. October 31, 1998. Crash Bandicoot Warped, new life at end as baby after jail. Each of these games involves a symbol of life after death and then finding a new life. They are all famous for being tied to the top of the industry and well regarded as picks for the best game of all time. This just means that they were all released in this window timed to some event IRL about fake deaths that I haven't identified yet. Speaking of which, the whole symbol for the dead, and how they have unfinished business, is tied to people who faked their deaths and then had to return to their lives for whatever reason momentarily. Already officially dead, but breaking taboo and returning to the old lives. So that solves quite a few ghost movies in some fashion. The final clue to solidify things is this one. June 5, 2007. Fallout 3 countdown ends. June 5, 2007. First Pac-Man International Championships. Pac-Man symbolizing a hunt for spooks, as I've gone over in my Invisible War post. So, you get the idea. The timeline taking place in the future is a misnomer, it's doing that thing that converts years. 2077 being 1977 and when Q clearance went into action. When the nukes went off, as in people went underground. Dilbert. I've never read Dilbert, but I was able to decode a small part of it due to the timing of one event. To understand, I need to remind you of a decode I cover frequently, which is how the Simpsons symbolism is tied to the Macintosh Lisa. 1976. First Apple Mac released $666.66. 1978. Steve Jobs' daughter Lisa Brennan born. 1978. Apple Lisa project begins. Plus 9 years. 1987. Steve Jobs acknowledges for the first time Lisa is his 9-year-old daughter. 1987. Simpsons premieres with Lisa Simpson as the smart 8-year-old daughter of a nuclear power plant worker. There is much more to this covered in other posts. The utility of it is in the early show representing the MK monitoring ops. The show literally begins with Homer intentionally conditioning Bart to be an idiot. One child is sacrificed and one child, Lisa, is given the ticket to success. Now because Lisa symbolizes the Macintosh. Who is the rival of Macintosh? September 11, 1994. Lisa Simpson meets rival and both compete before losing to Star Wars collectibles. September 12, 1994. Catbert introduced in Dilbert, Dogbert rival, evil head of tech. September 19, 1994. Microsoft wins Lisa lawsuit. That lawsuit was an attempt to kill Windows due to its similarity to Apple Lisa design. At the same time we have this Simpsons episode where Lisa gets into a war with a rival, and in Dilbert his dog, Dogbert, gets a rival in Catbert. Now what makes this even more clear as a connection is the fact that in the episode of Simpsons they both lose to Star Wars collectibles. If you read my Star Wars decode you know it ties into the data transfer ops and directly connects to Apple's history, but that's best covered in a different post. This solves part of Dilbert because his dog, Dogbert, works in technical support jobs and tries to conquer the world. Dog symbolism is used to represent many things, but in this context it's likely the op. As in Dilbert represents a comms-aware individual across the world working in tech. Their dog is the op they are tied to and likely itself either Macintosh/Microsoft or some other massive entity that many describe as trying to take over the world. When I brought this up to my readers, one asked me to decode Loud Howard. A curious character that despite only appearing in a dozen comics over the past decade is incredibly popular. October 9, 2006. Google buys YouTube. October 12, 2006. Loud Howard returns. Seems this rare appearance might represent the Google/YouTube merger. A symbol of, keep it quiet, as a joke running gag of the company loudly blaring everywhere that this thing is happening. Though this is me taking a guess rather than having identified a clear pattern. Speaking of Google in relation to comics. I briefly went over before this point before. Note Walt Disney was founded the same day they began releasing their hybrid cartoons with real little girls. Alice Comedies, Alice in Wonderland with Virginia. Notice Alice was paired with Felix the Cat, which just so happens to be the same name as the first head of the KGB who just so happened to begin within 1 month of this. October 14, 1923, Barney Google comic. October 16, 1923, Walt Disney founded. October 16, 1923, Alice in Wonderland series begins Walt Disney with Felix the Puss. November 15, 1923, Felix first chairman of KGB begins. KGB has a long history of blackmail you can Google yourself, and so I don't think this is a coincidence back then they began at the same time with the same name invoked. Same symbol used in modern times. Why am I bringing this up again? Well, my recent posts have gone into Seattle Mariner comms, tied to tech company funding. I learned this week. November 15, 1934. Mariner Eccles head of Federal Reserve. November 17, 1934. Snuffy Smith introduced to Barney Google takes over comic over time. 1977 Mariner former head of Fed death. 1977 Seattle Mariners baseball team begins. February 2, 2014. Seattle beats Denver Broncos at Super Bowl. February 3, 2014. Janet Yellen 15th head of Fed. This is hard to decode without finding the original comics, but I can't help but notice the connection of Fed changes in relation to Japan's tech and car sector being Fed pumped starting around the same time. The payment for the services tied to tech at the time. A transition from US to Japan funding perhaps. I'm not altogether sure that's the precise symbol, but I do know Seattle is the key point with trade to China and Japan and that makes it symbolic. I feel there's something here, but I need to dig deeper. I'm sure it's connected to Mossad setting up tech shop in Japan and then being removed, based on the comms it was perceived as a takeover, but that's better tackled in one of my other posts on this. Code Geass/death note/Wikileaks. Here's an interesting connection I dug up this month. October 5, 2006. Google Code Search is launched as a free beta product from Google, allowing web users to search for open source code. October 5, 2006. Code Geass Lelouch of the Rebellion MBS anime. October 4, 2006. Wikileaks. October 4, 2006. Death Note anime. At a glance you might not see the connection outside of being released at the same time, but context is everything. How would you symbolize Wikileaks? Think about both shows' plots. I'll give a few bullet points. Top is Geass, bottom is Death Note. Both shows involve the smartest high school student in the world frustrated with the evil in the world. They both had long given up the idea of fixing the problem themselves, but both obtain a superpower allowing them to instantly control and kill anyone they can personally identify. Upon obtaining this power, both decide to become a celebrity terrorist to create an ideal new world. Both become heroes to an underground movement but end the series dead and hated as the ultimate evil. They each spend the majority of the series hiding their identity as they don the mantle of world-famous terrorist. Hiding their involvement in mass murder and terrorism is the primary conflict of both series. Now reconcile this with Wikileaks. A website launched that can destroy lives just by writing their names down. Just like a Death Note. That's just the tip of the iceberg, and I will likely go more in depth in a future post, but these were extremely popular series released at the exact same time in anime. Now Death Note also has a manga that predates it. Notice the Grim Reaper scythes on each. June 2003. Soul Eater manga one-shot, Death God Scythe. December 2003. Death Note manga begins, Death God Scythe. April 6, 2008. Code Geass Season 2. April 7, 2008. Soul Eater anime, Shinigami School. Another connection, but this time it's specifically tied to the scythe/death god symbolism. I need to dig into this more before I can grasp the point, but notice how Soul Eater doesn't connect to Wikileaks but does connect to both of the other media properties. Wikileaks doesn't work at all as a symbol for Soul Eater as it doesn't involve someone pretending to be a terrorist, but it has the same iconography as Death Note and was released around the same time. Furthermore, the anime version was timed to the second, and final, season of Code Geass. This tells me that Wikileaks may not have been an inevitability, but instead perhaps an idea that was being worked by groups of young comms-aware people who knew how to hide their identity and expose extremely secret things around the world. That's largely a hypothesis at this stage. The timings do not necessarily reflect allies of theirs but the markers of groups contextualizing the events for the comms-aware masses. This explains why in both Death Note and Code Geass the heroes are portrayed as having noble intentions but are corrupted and eventually doomed. I also noticed when I looked at the notable moments for Code Geass that they had a strange hiatus. It was incredibly popular at the time, and so to suddenly take a 5-month break is something I've never heard of happening. When I look at the timing of it and context of the story. Note the episode right before the hiatus involved the main character declaring the British territory to be the new United States of Japan. What I find interesting about this is when it came back this plan falls apart, and it's the same day that the American football branch in Europe closed down. This could be coincidence, and notice also when it came back there was also yet another game about kids playing a game of death gods that aren't any of the ones above. Made by the same company behind Soul Eater. Clearly there's a deep rabbit hole here I need to work on, but that'll have to wait for another post. One thing I will say before moving on is these shows have some really blunt symbolism that reinforces comms I talk about frequently. For example, in the first episode of Code Geass there is what amounts to a terrorist bomb that turns out to be a naked girl. A girl that can give someone the power to control other people, aka blackmail. Nuke equals blackmail is one I talk about frequently, same concept here. Anyway, let's move on. The final topic I want to go into is Krakatoa. The loudest sound ever recorded. Krakatoa. The painting, Scream, and Krakatoa said to be origin of Scream's red sky. Which means that painting has the same root symbol as Krakatoa. December 16, 1927. Buck Rogers' debut, time stopped for 492 years. December 29, 1927. Anak Krakatoa emerges from the sea, scream. December 30, 1927. Snow stops Big Ben, time stop. December 23, 1927. I scream for ice cream, song. That's a pattern right there. Same time we get two different scream comms and two different time stop comms. One being a famous comic and another being a famous song. Given Big Ben ties into blackmail, I can guess how scream might symbolize something going on there. February 12, 1884. Teddy's daughter Alice Roosevelt-born mother dies 2 days later. February 12, 1884. Krakatoa Committee established to watch volcanoes. I believe the concept with Krakatoa watching, in relation to Teddy Roosevelt plus Alice Roosevelt, is in the installation of protection, so as to prevent rebellions in the future. How do they prevent rebellions? That'd be with blackmail. This is why Alice, being born to Teddy, is tied to watching volcanoes. Teddy Roosevelt installed to prevent problems. Took a VP mysteriously dying and a president getting shot to death to install Teddy. The volcano exploding symbolism gets more clear when we consider the volcanic eruption right after Titanic. April 1912, Titanic. June 1912, largest volcano eruption of 20th century, new volcano. This was when they were trying to get the Federal Reserve, and the murder only began with Astor. From there a terror campaign was launched using merchandise to do it in plain sight. 1898, Nabisco. 1898, wreck of Titan, Titanic ship sinking story, ship identical to Titanic. 1908, Titanic ordered. 1908, Oreo predecessor Hydrox. 1912 March, Oreo launched. 1912 April, Titanic sinks. How did they get people to go along with the murder? Notice the art theater that year involved a sexual display of old men and young boys. Same art expo tied to Whistler's mother. So as usual it's blackmail and threats. Getting people to take lifesavers in 1912 right after Titanic. How do you get a lifesaver? By cooperating with the mint. The key symbol of volcano is clear. 1812, War of 1812 begins. 1812 eruption of Mount Tambora begins erupting. 1815 Mount Tambora eruption ends, U.S. Capitol burned. 1815 War of 1812 ends. Began and ended at the same time. Something they hear in the newspapers loudly. What do they hear? Volcano is akin to a scream and run for your lives, it's coming kind of thing. A panic to evacuate ASAP. April 15, 1912. RMS Titanic sinking, 1514 dead. June 5, 1912. U.S. Marines invade Cuba, part of the Banana Wars. 06/June 9, 1912. Largest USA volcanic eruption of the 20th century, Novarupta. June 10, 1912. More axe murders, Mary Catherine Moore, 8 deaths, 6 family members and 2 guests, famous unsolved crimes series of murders. June 27, 1912. Leader of the Cuban resistance death, Evaristo Estenas. July 7, 1912. Harry Houdini famously escapes an underwater coffin, same year as Titanic. 1912 Life-saver. July 8, 1912. USA largest volcanic eruption ends, 20th century, Novarupta. July 8, 1912. Russian and Japanese signed a secret treaty regarding the division of their interests in Inner Mongolia, now part of China. The Harry Houdini escape from underwater coffin is a perfect symbol tied to the life-saver and other comms, trying to panic people in Congress, getting them to flip ASAP and get on board with the mint. The volcano kept erupting until they were confident they had gotten the votes necessary. Seems many famous painting and other famous works tie into the origins of sports. January 15, 1892. James Naismith's rules for basketball are published for the first time, Springfield YMCA. January 22, 1892. Krakatoa, the day the world screamed. Though just because they take place near each other doesn't mean it's connected, it's a launching point for an investigation I may do. There are plenty of curious timings that I haven't confirmed yet. I found this curious pattern tied to this film about Krakatoa east of Java, coffee. December 26, 1968. Krakatoa east of Java movie released Sweden first +3 December 29, 1968. AFL Championship Shea Stadium NYC_New York Jets, Joe Namath, beat Raiders. The first two releases were timed to Joe Namath's biggest 2 wins of his career. January 9, 1969. Krakatoa east of Java Tokyo release +3 January 12, 1969. Super Bowl Jets Joe Namath famously guaranteed a victory Namath MVP. This could be entirely coincidence, but it's just odd that it's so precise. And then the third and final release of the film. May 14, 1969. Krakatoa east of Java +3 May 17, 1969. Russian probe Venera 6 landed on Venus. I covered this before as tied to recordings, and of course Joe Namath is a complete symbol for that which I covered last post. My take on Volcano was that it was akin to a scream and rage, but it also connects to this kind of thing because how do people flip and save themselves? Compromising pictures taken. So it doesn't change the symbol, it's merely the end result. The core symbol with volcanoes is not blackmail though, I'm fairly sure it's the announcement of run away, i.e. flip. December 14, 2012. Volcano warning. December 14, 2012. Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting. Given when it happened, this might have been a giant warning siren to keep kids away from school and stay safe, as they could tell something big was planned that day. Volcano about to blow based on what he was hearing in the comms world. So by that logic, volcano could be used for any event which involves horrors that would invoke the symbol of a scream. Let's consider the fiction world and scream. Scream. Loudest sound in world Krakatoa is tied to that scream painting, and when I brought this up to my readers, one asked me to consider the scream mask. Ghost face killer Wu-Tang. Scream symbolism with victim stalking. You may recall in past decodes I discussed how certain families are made examples of and hunted. One was the Astor family and another was Fitzgerald. Saving Zelda, Fitzgerald. February 21, 1986. Legend of Zelda, Hyrule Fantasy releases in Japan. June 18, 1986. Zelda's only child dies. August 22, 1987. Zelda 1, removes Hyrule Fantasy tagline, released in USA. The only direct descendant of Zelda died right after the game was released. A game about needing to save Zelda from being kidnapped/hunted/killed. The symbol is to rescue her, but anyway, the target of Scream for the TV show invokes this same name. January 17, 1991. Willa Fitzgerald born. January 17, 1991. Operation Desert Storm. This could be a coincidence, but as birth dates are chosen for messaging and the invasion into the Middle East is something Bush and certain parties in the Middle East have clashed heads about enough to create mass tragedies in the past, this does seem an unlikely, but possible connection. Another one of these loose threads I'll dig into and find my hunch as either spot on or way off. A symbol of targets being picked off allies due to war choices. Looking into Wu-Tang I noticed. February 10, 1997. Kobe School Killer. February 11, 1997. Wu-Tang, Triumph, most successful song from Wu-Tang Clan. Lyrics of song conclude on terrifying enemies with threats of death. These ops of tragedy for those involved end up leading to their escape with a death as the target detonates. The actual criminal dies, but the ones that created him die, as a way to avoid retribution from whichever party takes the losses. This is why I find it interesting a famously banned game is tied to Wu-Tang Clan, about a fight to the death for a chance at reincarnation. Final thoughts. There have been a lot of great tweets from Musk lately. Really trying hard to bring attention to things like the January 6th debacle and all the evidence that is ignored by mainstream media. I'm not sure precisely the plan, but I do have some thoughts on it. I believe the AI push is a calm for the populace waking up, though it's also clearly an amazing technology. Such things are often tied to real things as it's the motive for why it becomes popular. I believe there's a lot of fear with people becoming aware of what has gone on. Deleted tweet, symbolism by deleting of removing the stigma tied to this perception of people learning what happened as bad. Shot in the dark, that one, but it's one of those shots I like to take just in case I get a bull's eye. Over time with patterns I can figure out which ones I got right and wrong. Also, I'm a bit reluctant to say this, but I want to share a conversation I had with a reader that told me they would have been my friend growing up. I appreciated the sentiment, but it made me realize people misunderstand the reality of what being an MK sacrifice is. It's easy to imagine a world where you want to help a victim, but the nature of the MK ops are more cruel than that. The methods of programming involve turning the people, sheep, around the target against the target, and so the bystanders around the victim either ignore or engage in abuse to further hurt the target. I can't think of any type of person that exists that would be immune, especially as a child, to these methodologies. I have said before I was a victim of the MK world and I would never have been visible as a victim to anyone unless you are the type to hug a Columbine shooter as they spout insanity. The nature of these crimes is beyond the scope of what a regular person can even perceive. Most people would view these demons in training as the true cause of all evil in the world. This is by design as they are meant to absorb that blame as they detonate. The programming didn't work on me, at least as much as some of the others, but that doesn't mean anyone would view what I was as a victim. I was conditioned to be a monster, and even though I never became one, such an existence is a natural repellent to good people. Human beings by nature desire companionship. As a child, the role models I was pushed into admiring were drug addicts, pyromaniacs, people who beat animals, robbed houses, and talked about causing mass death. I was conditioned to be so desperate for companionship that I needed to have those people's approval. The only way to get that approval was to do the same things they did but more so. Meaning that they would do illegal things in a protected environment and then condition a target into doing an escalated version in public. Combine this with constant abuse over years and this is the trick used to convince any child into becoming a bloodthirsty monster. Many MK targets do become monsters. At the very core of this system is the fact the target chooses to act. Born identity is a romanticization of the process. Not showing the abuse creating the monster or the actual emotional wreck such a person is, but if you just read the text they lay out the nature of it. Conditioning evil to become a routine until the target themselves decides to do whatever it is the brainwashers want. This is why it's almost impossible to prosecute anyone involved. The ones around the target condition them into the desired behavior. I could call them the true monsters, but as I often go into in posts, it's even more complex than that. People being born into that system and expected to sacrifice others lest they become sacrifices themselves. It's a mess to untangle who is responsible for what, and that's one of many reasons I'm dedicated to just getting it out on the open. The world needs to have a big long chat with itself. It can't remain invisible as so much of the wrong in this world is built into that tactical ignorance. The important thing for me is making sure it never happens again, and to that point I'll speak about the past as much as necessary. However, this blog is not about me, it's about all of us learning comms, so until the day comes when I need to speak directly, let's focus on learning comms. That's the quickest route as I see it to the good ending. I only mention my past as a utility to help solve things. I appreciate that people listen to the decoding and try their hand at it, it's what I'm here for. I consider anyone that put up with as many errors as I know are in these posts a friend. I understand it's confusing how someone who is too much of a prude to even curse can proclaim themselves as a peer to brain-dead monsters, but people can better themselves and all it takes is the willpower to do it. I always had the willpower to do it, but the environment I had would never allow it. How I escaped from that environment and the journey from brain-dead monster to what I am today is an interesting one that remains untold, but it's not time, yet I think for that. Everything makes sense with the full story, but we are all missing pieces still for it. This is why I need to get back to work. Telegram chat. Join our Telegram group. Send leads, begin decoding. This has been Beans, Alice and Teddy.